The rain fell hard that night, washing the narrow streets of the old city. People hurried home under umbrellas, their footsteps echoing against the wet pavement. But in the middle of the road, where the light from the lamps barely reached, a small figure stood alone. She was no more than 16, wrapped in a torn shawl, shaking from the cold. Her eyes were wide, lost, and tired. She had no name she could remember, no family who would come looking for her, and nowhere to go. The city was not kind to people like her. For days she had been wandering, searching for food, for warmth, for a face that might show kindness. Each door she knocked on stayed closed. Each person she tried to speak to avoided her. She was nothing to them, just another stranger, another burden. The hunger in her stomach had become a sharp pain, but she was used to pain now. It was like a shadow that never left her. That evening she sat near an abandoned tea stall, trying to hide from the rain under a broken roof. The cold air bit her skin and her lips trembled. She pressed her knees to her chest, hoping to feel a little warmth. Her clothes were soaked and the wind made her shiver harder. The smell of wet earth filled the air. In the distance she heard cars, laughter and life, sounds that felt far away from her world. She wanted to sleep, but she was afraid. The streets were not safe at night, especially for someone like her. As she struggled to stay awake, a shadow moved nearby. She froze. A tall man walked out from the dark corner of the alley. He wore a long coat and heavy boots. His face was half hidden by the rain, but his presence was strong, the kind that made people look away. Everyone in the area knew about him. Some called him dangerous, some called him cruel. He was the man no one wanted to cross. His name was Arman Khan. Arman was known for running things in his part of the city. People whispered about him, about his power, his anger, and the fear he carried with him. But that night, when he saw the girl sitting alone under the broken roof, he stopped. Something about her stillness caught his attention. She didn't look up when he approached. She just sat there, staring at the ground as if she had already given up. He stepped closer. "Hey!" His voice was deep and rough, the kind that usually made people obey without question. The girl flinched, but she didn't run. She had nowhere to go. "What are you doing here?" he asked. No answer. Her eyes stayed on the ground. He noticed how thin she was, how her hands trembled, and how her lips had turned pale. He sighed quietly, pulling out a small packet from his coat. Some bread he hadn't eaten earlier. He placed it beside her. "Eat." She lifted her head slowly, her eyes confused, scared. She looked at the bread, then at him, unsure if it was a trick. But hunger won over fear. Her fingers reached for it, shaking, and she began to eat. Small bites at first, like she was afraid it might disappear. Arman stood there, watching silently. Something inside him stirred. Something he hadn't felt in years. Pity? No, it wasn't pity. It was a strange pull, like he had seen a reflection of himself in her emptiness. When she finished eating, she whispered softly, "Thank you." It was the first word she had spoken in days. Her voice was weak, almost lost in the sound of the rain. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked down. I don't know," she said. He frowned. "You don't know?" She shook her head. "I don't remember anything. Not my name, not where I'm from. I just woke up one day near the station. I tried to ask people, but no one helped me." Her words came out slowly, as if each one cost her strength. Arman studied her face. He could tell she wasn't lying. There was no cunning in her eyes, only confusion and fear. For a moment he thought about walking away. She wasn't his problem. He had enough to deal with. People depending on him, enemies waiting for a mistake, a past that didn't let him rest. But he couldn't move. "Come with me," he said finally. She froze. "Where?" "Somewhere you won't freeze to death." Her heart raced. Every warning she had ever heard about strangers echoed in her head. But when she looked at him again, she didn't see danger. She saw something else, something steady. Maybe it was the way he spoke, firm but not cruel. Maybe it was because she was too tired to care anymore. Slowly she stood up, following him at a distance. They walked through the quiet streets, the rain still falling. She tried to keep up, her legs weak, her body heavy from exhaustion. He didn't speak, and neither did she. After some time, they reached a large iron gate. Beyond it stood a tall old house with cracked walls but warm lights inside. Two men stood at the entrance, and when they saw Arman, they stepped aside quickly. The girl hesitated. "Is this your house?" Arman nodded. "It's where I live." She looked unsure. Why are you helping me? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he said, because you remind me of something I lost a long time ago. She didn't understand what he meant, but she followed him in. The warmth of the room hit her immediately. The smell of burning wood, the sound of quiet murmurs. A woman in her 40s came out from the kitchen, surprised to see a soaked girl behind Armin. Who's this? The woman asked. Give her something to eat and dry clothes, Armand said simply. She'll stay here tonight. The woman looked at him for a moment, then nodded. All right. The girl stood awkwardly, unsure if she should thank him or leave. But before she could say anything, Armin turned and walked away upstairs. She watched him go, his heavy footsteps fading into silence. The woman led her to a small room near the back. It had an old bed, a blanket, and a single lamp. You can rest here, the woman said kindly. Don't worry. No one will harm you. The girl nodded, her eyes already filling with tears. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe. She changed into the dry clothes, ate a bowl of soup, and lay down on the bed. The sound of rain outside slowly faded. As she closed her eyes, she thought of the man who had brought her here. The one everyone seemed to fear, yet who had shown her more kindness than anyone else. She didn't know who he really was or why he had helped her. But one thing was certain. Her life had changed the moment he found her in the rain. That night, for the first time in a long time, she slept without fear. And somewhere in the same house, behind closed doors, Armin Khan sat by the window watching the storm pass. His mind was restless. He didn't understand why he had brought her home, but deep down he felt it was the right thing to do. He had seen too much cruelty in his life, done things he wasn't proud of, and lost people he cared about. But when he saw that lost girl sitting alone in the rain, something inside him softened. Maybe fate had brought her to him for a reason, one he didn't yet know. The city outside continued to move, unaware of the small act of mercy that had just taken place. And as the night grew quiet, two lonely souls, broken in their own ways, began the first chapter of something that neither of them had expected. A story that would test kindness, trust, and redemption. The morning light entered through the small window, soft and golden. The girl woke slowly, blinking against the warmth that touched her face. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The blanket wrapped around her felt too clean, too soft. Then the memories of last night came back. The rain, the alley, the man who had stopped and spoken to her. Armand Khan. She sat up, her hands clutching the blanket tightly. The room around her was quiet, simple but comfortable. A wooden chair stood by the wall, and beside it, a folded set of clothes lay waiting. They were plain but clean, a long dress and a scarf. She got out of bed, feeling her feet touch the cold floor. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't hungry, wasn't afraid. But she still felt uncertain. The door creaked open, and the woman from last night stepped in, smiling kindly. You're awake. Good. I brought you breakfast. She placed a tray on the table, warm bread, a boiled egg, and a cup of tea. The smell made the girl's stomach twist with hunger again. Thank you, she whispered, still shy. The woman nodded. You can call me Shazia. I help take care of this house. What's your name, child? The girl hesitated. Her lips parted, but no name came out. I don't know. Shazia looked at her with gentle eyes. That's all right. You'll remember one day. Until then, we'll find something to call you. After breakfast, Shazia helped her wash up and change into the clean clothes. The fabric felt strange against her skin, or soft and new. When she looked in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize herself. She looked human again, not like the shadow she had been in the rain. As she walked through the hallway, she could hear voices, men talking, laughter mixed with footsteps. She peeked from behind the wall and saw a few of Armin's men sitting around a table, drinking tea and discussing something serious. They looked strong, rough, the kind of men who didn't smile much. When they noticed her, their talking stopped for a second. Who's that girl? One of them asked quietly. Boss brought her in last night, another replied. No one knows who she is. Strange, the first man muttered. He never does things like that. She stepped back quickly, afraid they might ask her questions. Just then, Armin appeared at the end of the corridor. His dark eyes scanned the room until they landed on her. The men went silent, straightening in their chairs. Armand walked toward her, his footsteps steady. You're awake, he said. Yes, she replied softly. Did you eat? She nodded. Good. You can stay here until you decide where to go next. Her heart sank a little. She didn't know where to go. The streets? The station? There was nothing waiting for her outside those walls. Can I stay? A little longer? She asked, her voice trembling. Armand looked at her carefully. She seemed so fragile, like a bird that had forgotten how to fly. You can stay, he said finally. But remember, this is not a place for children. You'll have to follow the rules. I will, she promised. He gave a small nod and turned to leave. But before he did, one of his men whispered something in his ear. Armand frowned and walked away toward his office. The girl watched him go, feeling a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Days passed, and slowly, she began to learn the rhythm of the house. There were many people who came and went, men who worked for Armand, some serious, some kind. Shazia stayed close to her, teaching her small chores like helping in the kitchen, cleaning, or serving tea. The girl didn't mind the work. It made her feel useful, part of something. At night, she would sometimes hear voices from Armand's office, loud discussions, sometimes anger, sometimes silence that felt heavier than words. She didn't understand much, but she knew he was respected and feared by everyone around him. One afternoon, when she was cleaning the hallway, she saw Armand sitting in the courtyard, talking to an older man. His face looked tired, his eyes distant. There was something about him that didn't match the rumors she had heard. People said he was cold, heartless, but she saw something different. A sadness in his eyes, a heaviness he carried quietly. Later that day, Shazia handed her a plate of food and said, "Take this to Armand Sahib's office." Her hands shook a little as she held the tray. She knocked gently. "Come in," his voice called out. She stepped inside. The room smelled of wood and smoke. Papers were scattered across the desk. Armand looked up, surprised to see her. "You can leave it there," he said. She placed the tray on the table and turned to leave, but curiosity made her pause. "You work a lot," she said softly. He raised an eyebrow. "That's how I keep things running. Do you ever rest?" He gave a small, amused smile, something rare on his face. "Rest isn't something I can afford." She hesitated. "You helped me. I want to help you too." Armand leaned back in his chair. "And how will you help me?" She thought for a moment. "I can clean, cook, or just listen if you need to talk." He stared at her for a while, unsure whether to laugh or scold her. But there was honesty in her words, the kind of honesty that didn't expect anything in return. "We'll see," he said finally. That evening, she sat near the window of her room watching the sunset paint the sky orange. For the first time, she felt like she belonged somewhere, even if she didn't know for how long. The fear that used to follow her everywhere began to fade, but peace doesn't last long in a place built on power. A few nights later, the calm house turned tense. Loud voices echoed in the hallway. The girl woke up and peeked outside. Armand was talking to one of his men, or rather arguing. The man looked nervous. "They tried to cross our line again," the man said quickly. Armand's jaw tightened. "Did you handle it?" "We warned them, but they're testing you, boss." Armand's eyes grew darker. "Then they'll learn not to." The girl stepped back quietly. She didn't understand what they were talking about, but she could feel the weight of danger in the air. For the first time, she realized the kind of world she had stepped into. A world where one mistake could bring violence, where trust was rare. The next morning, the house was quiet again. Armand left early, and no one knew where he went. Shazia told her not to worry. "He always comes back," she said. "He has his ways." That evening he returned, his coat dusty, a small cut on his hand. When she saw it, she ran to get some cloth and water. "You're hurt," she said. "It's nothing," he replied, but she gently took his hand and cleaned the wound anyway. He didn't stop her. For a moment their eyes met, his full of old pain, hers full of silent gratitude. "You shouldn't care about people like me," he said quietly. "It will only bring you trouble." She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe someone cared about you once, and that's why you're still here." He didn't answer, but her words stayed with him. That night, as he sat alone in his office, he thought about her, the girl with no name, no past, and yet somehow she was bringing light into a place that had known only shadows. And in her room she couldn't sleep either. She thought about him, the man everyone feared, yet who had given her kindness when the world had turned away. She didn't know what her future would be, but she knew one thing. She didn't want to run anymore. For the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, this was where her story was meant to begin. The days slowly turned into weeks, and the girl began to feel a quiet rhythm in her life. The large house that had once seemed cold and mysterious now felt almost familiar. Every morning she would help Shazia prepare breakfast, sweep the courtyard, and water the few plants that stood by the old wall. It was simple work, but it gave her peace. For someone who had spent so long wandering the streets, even small routines felt like miracles. Arman Khan remained the same in many ways: calm, quiet, always busy. But there were small changes that others noticed, even if he didn't. He no longer left the house as early as before. Sometimes when he passed through the kitchen and saw the girl helping, he would stop for a moment, watching silently before walking away. The men in the house had grown used to her presence too. At first they didn't know what to make of her, but her gentle nature and quiet manners slowly won them over. She never asked questions about their work, never tried to go where she shouldn't. She simply did what was asked of her and smiled politely when someone spoke to her. One evening, after dinner, Arman sat in his study, reading a file under the dim yellow light. He heard a soft knock on the door. "Come in," he said. The girl stepped inside, holding a cup of tea. "Shazia said you didn't eat much tonight," she said softly. He looked up, slightly surprised. "You're keeping an eye on me now?" She smiled a little. "Someone should. You look tired." He leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. "I'm not the kind of man people worry about." "Maybe not people," she said, setting the cup on his table. "But I can." For a moment, silence filled the room. Her voice was calm, innocent, but her words had weight. Arman didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to care, not after years of building walls around himself. He nodded slowly, looking at the tea. "Thank you." She turned to leave, but before she did, she asked softly, "Can I ask something?" He looked up. "Go ahead. Why do people fear you?" The question hung in the air. Arman didn't answer right away. He stared at her, his eyes dark and thoughtful. "Because fear keeps people in line," he said finally. "And sometimes it's easier to be feared than to be betrayed." She frowned slightly, not fully understanding. "But you helped me. You don't seem like someone people should fear." He gave a faint, tired smile. "You don't know me well enough." She looked at him quietly for a moment and then said, "Maybe one day I will." When she left the room, Arman sat there in silence. Her words had touched something deep inside him, a place he had locked away long ago. The next few days were peaceful, but beneath the surface, trouble was building. Arman's men whispered about rival groups in the city, people who wanted to take over his business, who didn't respect his name anymore. The streets were changing, and so was the balance of power. One night, while Arman was out handling a matter, the girl sat on the steps outside, watching the moon. The cool air brushed her face, and she felt strangely calm. For the first time, she wasn't scared of being alone. She knew he would come back, and somehow she trusted that. Shazia came to sit beside her. "You've brought a strange calm to this house," she said with a smile. "Me?" the girl asked. "Yes, you. Before you came, this place felt heavier." Arman Sahib spoke little, laughed never, but now he seems a little softer. "I think you remind him of something good." The girl looked down, unsure what to say. She didn't know what she meant to him, or if she meant anything at all, but her heart felt warm hearing that. Hours later, when the door finally opened, Arman walked in. He looked tired but unharmed. She stood quickly, relief washing over her face. "You're back," he nodded. "You were waiting?" "Just wanted to make sure you were safe." He paused, studying her. No one had ever waited up for him before, not since his mother had passed away many years ago. Something inside him softened. "I'm fine," he said quietly. "Go to sleep," she smiled faintly. "Good night." That night Arman couldn't sleep. He sat by his window watching the stars. The girl's words and her innocent care lingered in his mind. For years his life had been ruled by power, decisions, and fear. But now, this nameless girl was changing something within him, slowly and silently. Days turned into weeks again, and a strange bond began to grow between them, one built not on words, but on quiet moments. She would bring him tea when he worked too long. He would make sure she had everything she needed. Sometimes they would exchange only a few sentences a day, but those few words carried warmth. Then one day, as the sun was setting, a visitor came to the house, a man Armand hadn't seen in years. His name was Malik, an old friend who had once worked beside him before leaving to join another group. The reunion was tense. "You've gone soft, Armand," Malik said, glancing around the house. "You used to rule these streets. Now people say you've become weak." Armand's eyes turned cold. "Let people say what they want. I don't answer to them," Malik smirked. "Weakness invites danger. And this time it's coming fast." After Malik left, Armand stood by the window for a long time, thinking. The girl saw the worry on his face and stepped closer. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. He didn't turn. "Nothing you should worry about." "But I do," she said. "You gave me a home when no one else did. I can't just stand by if something happens." He finally looked at her. "You're not part of this world, and I won't let it touch you." His voice was firm, but his eyes carried something more, fear. Not for himself, but for her. That night, while she lay awake in her bed, she couldn't stop thinking about his words. She didn't understand everything about his life, but she knew danger followed him. Still, she couldn't imagine leaving. He had saved her once. Now she wanted to be someone who could stand beside him, not hide behind him. The next morning, she went to Shazia. "Teach me how to help more," she said. "I don't want to just sit and wait," Shazia smiled sadly. "You have a kind heart, child, but Armand Sahib's world is full of shadows. Be careful. Light doesn't always survive there." The girl nodded. "Still, I want to try." Later that day, as Armand prepared to leave again, she stopped him at the door. "Promise me you'll come back," she said. He looked at her, really looked. "I always come back," he said quietly. But she could see something in his eyes that told her he wasn't sure. When he walked out into the fading light, she stood at the gate, watching until he disappeared down the street. Something inside her ached, a fear she couldn't explain. She didn't know that the coming days would test both their lives, that the peace they had found was about to be shaken by the very past Armand had tried so hard to leave behind. Inside that house, she waited not as a helpless girl anymore, but as someone who had begun to find her strength, a strength that came not from fighting, but from caring deeply for someone who had once been feared by all. And though she didn't know it yet, her presence would soon change the course of Armand's life forever. The city streets had grown colder, and a sense of tension settled over the neighborhood. Even within the house, the warmth she had felt for weeks began to feel fragile, as if it could be broken at any moment. The girl had learned to read the small signs: hushed conversations, worried glances, the sudden silence when someone entered the room. Danger was creeping closer, and she could feel it. One morning she woke to find Armand gone. He had left before the sun rose, as he often did. But this time, there was a heaviness in the house that she hadn't felt before. The men seemed more serious, more cautious. Shazia moved quietly, avoiding her gaze. Something had changed, though no one said it aloud. She tried to focus on her chores, cleaning the floors and tidying the kitchen, but her mind kept drifting to him. Where had he gone? Was he in danger? She worried not only for herself, but for the man who had given her a home when no one else had. She remembered the first night he had brought her in, the way he had looked at her in the rain, and she realized that he had trusted her with more than just a place to stay. He had trusted her with a piece of his life, and a piece no one else ever saw. Hours later, he returned. His coat was dusted with dirt, his sleeves slightly torn, and his face was marked with fatigue. When she saw him, she ran forward. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Armand paused at the doorway, studying her with careful eyes. "I'm fine," he said finally, though his voice carried a weight that told a different story. "You don't look fine," she insisted. "Something happened," he shook his head. "Nothing you should be concerned about." She stepped closer, her small hands brushing against his arm. "I'm part of this house now. That means I'm part of your life. I want to know when you're in danger." For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice softer than she had ever heard, he admitted, "The streets aren't safe right now. Rival groups are moving closer. I had to handle something before it got worse." Her heart tightened. "Can I help?" He looked down at her and saw the determination in her eyes, a courage she didn't yet know she had. He sighed. "No, this is my world, not yours. You stay here where it's safe." But she shook her head. "I don't want to hide anymore. You didn't hide when you saved me. I want to stand with you. He stared at her for a long moment, the weight of his responsibilities pressing on him. Finally, he nodded. Not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't stop her from being brave. "All right," he said quietly. "But you must promise me you'll listen. Do exactly as I say, and never take unnecessary risks." "I promise," she said firmly. Over the next few days, the girl began learning more about the world she had entered. Armin taught her how to read the streets, how to notice danger before it arrived, and how to keep calm when everyone around was tense. She learned to listen, not just with her ears but with her eyes, noticing small details others overlooked. One evening, Armin brought her to the roof of the house. The city stretched below them, lights twinkling in the dark. He handed her a small telescope. "Look closely," he said. She peered through it and saw the streets, the people, the alleys where shadows moved. "I see everything," she said softly. "Exactly," he said. "You need to see the danger before it sees you. And remember, not everyone is who they seem to be. Trust is rare." She nodded, understanding more than she had realized. But even as she learned, she never lost her kindness. She would quietly help the men, bring food, and speak softly when fear or anger threatened to overwhelm the house. Slowly, she became a part of the rhythm, not just as a guest, but as someone who made the house feel alive and less heavy. Then one night, a commotion broke the fragile calm. A group of strangers appeared at the gate. The girl heard shouting, footsteps, and the clatter of weapons. Her heart pounded. She ran to Armin's office. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice urgent. "They're testing me," he said calmly, though his hands were tense. "Stay inside." "Don't come out." "I won't," she said, but she could feel the fear gnawing at her. The men hurried to their positions, and Armin went to meet the intruders outside. She pressed herself against the wall, watching as the night erupted into chaos. Hours passed. The sounds of fighting, shouting, and orders filled the air. She stayed in the shadows, praying silently for his safety. Every moment without knowing if he was all right felt like a lifetime. Finally, the house fell silent again. She waited, holding her breath until she heard his footsteps approaching. He walked in, his coat torn, his face scratched, but he was alive. Relief flooded her. "You're hurt," she said, rushing forward. "I told you to stay inside," he said, though his voice held no anger. "I know," she whispered. "But I was scared." He looked at her then, really looked. "You don't have to be scared," he said softly. "Not while I'm here." For the first time, she saw the man behind the fearsome reputation. She saw the part of him that cared deeply, the part that had acted out of kindness when the world had been cruel. And she realized she had begun to care for him too, not just as someone who gave her shelter, but as someone who had changed her life. The next morning, the city was calm again, but the memory of the night remained. Armin moved through the house with a careful efficiency, checking the men, repairing the small damages, and making sure everything was safe. The girl followed quietly, offering help whenever she could. When the work was done, they sat together in the courtyard, the morning sun warming the damp earth. She looked at him, her voice hesitant. "Why do you keep helping me? You don't even know me." He was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Because you remind me of something I lost a long time ago. Something I thought I would never see again." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He gave a small smile, almost sad. "You remind me of hope, of the part of life I thought I had forgotten. When I saw you in the rain, I realized there was still something worth protecting even in this world." Her heart swelled, and she reached out to place a hand gently on his arm. "Then let me stay with you. Let me protect you too in my own way." He looked at her, the weight of his life pressing on him, and yet he felt a warmth he hadn't known for years. "All right," he said quietly. "But remember, the world outside isn't kind. You must be careful." Days turned into weeks again. She continued to learn, to grow stronger, to find courage she hadn't known she possessed. And through it all, the bond between her and Armin deepened, a bond built on trust, care, and the shared knowledge that both of them had been alone once, and now they had found each other. But peace, she knew, was fragile. Shadows still lingered outside the house, waiting for any mistake, any sign of weakness. And as she watched Armin move through the courtyard, checking locks, speaking quietly to his men, she realized that their lives would always be intertwined with danger, with the past and with the choices he had made long before she arrived. Still, she did not regret staying. She had a home, someone to care for, and someone who cared for her in return. For the first time in her life, she felt she belonged somewhere, even if the world beyond the walls remained uncertain. And in that quiet understanding, She found strength. Strength to face the fear, to stand beside him and to embrace the life that had once seemed impossible. The girl with no name had begun to carve a place for herself, not just in the house but in the heart of the man who had given her more than shelter. He had given her hope. The air in the house was heavy that morning, carrying a sense of urgency. The girl woke to find Shazia moving quickly through the corridors, giving instructions to the men. Arman was already gone, leaving a note that simply said he would return soon. The girl's stomach tightened. The calm they had enjoyed for weeks felt fragile, and she sensed that something significant was about to happen. She hurried to the courtyard to help organize the small defenses of the house. Though she was still young and inexperienced, she had learned quickly. Her hands moved steadily, placing supplies where they were needed, checking windows and making sure the doors were locked. Shazia watched her silently, pride in her eyes. "You've grown stronger than I thought possible," she whispered. Hours passed slowly, and the girl could feel the tension building outside. Rumors from the neighborhood had spread. Rival groups were planning something bold, testing Arman's control. The girl had heard whispers of danger before, but this time she felt it more personally. She was not just a bystander. She was part of this life now. Finally, the sound of footsteps on the gate signaled his return. Arman appeared calm but focused, his coat dusted with the dirt of the streets. He moved through the house like a man who knew every corner, every person, every detail. When he saw her, he gave a small, reassuring nod. "Stay close," he said quietly. The day passed with small checks, conversations, and careful movements. But just as the sun began to set, the expected threat arrived. Shadows gathered near the house, and the faint sound of distant voices carried over the walls. The girl's heart raced, but she stood firm, recalling his lessons. Watch, wait, and never underestimate the small details. Arman emerged from the shadows, his presence commanding, and addressed the intruders. His voice carried authority, warning, and calm all at once. "This house is under my protection. Leave now or face consequences you cannot imagine." The rival group hesitated, unsure of the strength they were facing. Arman's men moved silently, positioning themselves strategically around the house. The girl stayed near the window, peering carefully at the unfolding scene. Fear gripped her, but she reminded herself to stay composed. She was not helpless anymore. Hours of tension followed. Words were exchanged, small threats, warnings, and finally silence. The rivals retreated slowly, recognizing the strength and strategy of the household. Arman's calm and calculated response had ensured safety once again. The girl exhaled a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Later that night, the house was quiet again. Arman returned, his coat slightly torn, a small scratch on his cheek. The girl rushed to him, concern shining in her eyes. "Are you hurt badly?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Nothing serious," he said, but she could see the fatigue in his posture and the tension still lingering in his eyes. She guided him to a chair, helped remove his coat, and attended to his scratches. Her hands were gentle, careful, full of concern. "You've grown brave," he said softly, looking at her. "I never expected you to stay calm during all that." "I had to," she replied. "I couldn't just watch while you risked everything. You saved me once. I won't let fear stop me from helping you now." He studied her face and felt a deep sense of respect and admiration. She was no longer the fragile, lost girl who had shivered in the rain. She had become strong, courageous, and filled with compassion. And in that moment he realized something profound. She was no longer just a part of his house. She had become a part of his life, in ways he had never allowed himself to feel before. The next few days were a mixture of calm and preparation. Arman's mind was focused on maintaining safety and stability, but he also found moments to watch the girl quietly. She continued her chores, her movements confident, her eyes sharp. But she also smiled more, laughed softly with Shazia, and brought a warmth to the house that had been missing for years. One afternoon, as they sat in the courtyard, the girl looked at him. "Do you ever regret helping me?" she asked quietly. Arman paused. "Regret? No, I can't imagine leaving you to the streets again. You've reminded me that even in a life built on fear and power, there is room for kindness and trust." She smiled faintly. "I don't have a family, but I feel like I have one here. You and Shazia, and even the men. You're my family now." His eyes softened. "Family, it's something I never thought I'd have again. But you're right. You've changed that." Their bond grew stronger with each passing day. The girl's presence became a quiet source of strength for Arman. She reminded him of his better self, the part that had once hoped, trusted, and loved. And she learned from him as well, not just about survival or strategy, but about courage, responsibility, and the complexity of human life. Weeks later, the girl stood on the roof once more looking out over the city. Armin joined her silently, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. The sky was clear, the city lights beginning to glow. "You've come a long way," he said. "Not many could survive here and stay kind at the same time." She looked at him, her eyes bright. "I didn't just survive. I want to live, to help, to make a difference," he nodded. "And you will. But remember, life isn't always safe. Danger will come again, but now you won't face it alone." She smiled, feeling a warmth she had never known before. For the first time in her life, she felt complete, not because the streets had given her safety, but because someone had given her trust, kindness, and a home. Then one evening, Armin gathered everyone in the house. The rivals had retreated for now, and the neighborhood felt calmer. He stood before them, his presence commanding attention. "We've faced danger and survived. But our strength is not in fear alone. It's in trust, loyalty, and protecting those who cannot protect themselves." He looked at the girl. "You've reminded me of that truth. Even the smallest act of care can change everything." The girl felt tears prick her eyes. She had come from nothing, nameless, familyless, and abandoned. And now she stood among people who valued her, beside the man who had risked everything for her safety. Shazia smiled at her, and the men nodded with quiet respect. The house, once heavy with silence and tension, now held warmth, hope, and trust. That night, the girl and Armin sat together quietly in the courtyard. The stars sparkled above, the city calm below. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with genuine emotion. "For what?" he asked. "For showing me that life can be good again," she said. "For giving me a home when no one else would." He looked at her, and for the first time he allowed himself to smile fully. "And thank you for reminding me that even someone like me can still care and still hope." The girl leaned back, feeling the cool night air against her face. She no longer feared the streets, the strangers, or the world. She had found her place, her home, and her purpose. And more importantly, she had found someone who believed in her, who trusted her, and who showed her that even in a life touched by fear, kindness could still flourish. In the weeks and months that followed, the house became stronger, safer, and brighter. The girl continued to learn, to grow, and to help. And Armin, once feared and distant, learned to soften, to trust, and to allow hope back into his life. Together, they faced dangers, celebrated small victories, and built a family where none had existed before. The girl no longer had a name she remembered from her past, nor a family she had lost. But she had something more. A life worth living, people who cared, and a home built on trust and courage. And the man who had once been feared by all had found something he thought he had lost forever. Hope, purpose, and a bond that could not be broken. And so, the girl with no name, no family, and nowhere to run had finally found her place in the world. Not in the streets that had once abandoned her, but in a house full of people who valued her, with a man who had changed her life forever. And in that life she found not just safety, but love, trust, and the promise of a future that had once seemed impossible.